Hello, everyone. My name is Joyce Putman, and with all the bad things being said about police officers these days, I want to tell of my horrifying personal experience with police officers while living in the city of Zion,
Okay, gonna
Illinois.
stop it and tell me what you're gonna do.
Stop it.
You just hit this button right here since you know.
Well, I have been living in low income housing, the Hebron Townhouse Apartments, for about 6 years, peacefully, with my 5 children. I am the mother of 9, grandmother of about 15, and I was working at the school as a teacher's assistant. And when school was out, I got me another job at Great Lakes Naval Training at the bank as a utility clerk. When I went to pay my rent one day at the Hebron Townhouse Apartments, the manager, who was a very good manager, informed me that there were going to be some changes in the townhouse apartments. She didn't go into detail. The next thing I knew, a black security guard was walking around, and it seemed that from the minute he came, trouble started. For example, I would be coming home from work and I would see this black security guard, Deandre Butler, and white police officers on the property, and there were always a lot of people outside, and I would see Deandre Butler frisking people in front of this building, in front of the townhouse apartments, and I didn't know what was going on. Some of the ladies were complaining that Deandre Butler was entering into their homes unannounced. And a lot of people were getting evicted. And these were people that I had known for many years, during the 6 years that I stayed there. And we had become like family. We would help one another. And they were being evicted, and I didn't understand why, what was going on. And so, out of my concern, myself and maybe about 5 other tenants decided to go to the mayor's office, Mayor Lane Harrison, to inform him of the things that were occurring and to ask questions, not knowing that, as far as I'm concerned, there had been somewhat of a conspiracy set up between the mayor, the owner of the Hebron Townhouse Apartments, Debruler, and the police department. Apparently, they had all gotten together and planned this thing. And that is why, when I heard the manager had been fired, Mrs. Bone, and there had been another one placed in her position, Miss Deborah Langley, it occurred to me that this was the start of getting their plan executed as to what they were going to start doing to the tenants in the Hebron Townhouse Apartments, meaning that there had been certain rules set up that I was not aware of. One of the rules being that we couldn't have any visitors, and that there was to be, no drinking on the outside, which I didn't do that anyway, but I didn't know that all these different rules had been set in motion. As a matter of fact, I thought I was living in government subsidized housing, and that the property was owned by the government. And Chris Debruler was saying that it was his own private property. And so I never really understood that. But nevertheless, when we went to Mayor Lane Harrison and told him of the things that were going on, he didn't seem concerned at all. As a matter of fact, all he would talk about was the money that Chris Debruler was giving to the city, and he had no concern whatsoever as to the fact that people were being evicted from their homes. Well, my turn came when my daughter and her 3 children came to visit me on a Friday. And the following Sunday, my daughter was arrested by Deandre Butler because she was trespassing according to him. Now, that morning, my daughter was outside barbecuing, and I didn't know of any drinking, but my son did tell me that she had a beer on the back steps. And when she was done barbecuing, I fixed my plate and I went upstairs, ate, and I went to bed because I had to go to work the following morning. Well, the next thing I knew, my son was waking me up, telling me that a police officer wanted to speak with me at the back door. And I quickly put on my robe, my house shoes, and went downstairs. When I got to the back door, I saw the security guard with my daughter in handcuffs. And I heard my daughter crying, and the security guard walked up on my porch and said to me, "Your daughter is under arrest and she's going to jail." And I asked him, "Why? What has she done?" And he refused to answer me. He walked back to my daughter, took her arms, which were in handcuffs, and pulled them up, and at that she began screaming. Excuse me. And because of her scream, people were coming outside. Some were looking out their windows. Some were standing in the doorway. And so I'm steadily asking him, "Why are you arresting my daughter?" And he wouldn't say anything. And so I kept asking him. And finally, he stormed up to me and he said, "She's been bothering me all day." And of course, I asked, "Bothering you how? What was she doing?" And again, he tried to leave with my daughter. And I told him, "I am not going to let you get out of my sight with my daughter." At that, he became very enraged. He made a fist at me and stepped back. I thought he was going to run up on me and hit me in my face, so I grabbed the top of the barbecue grill. Instead, he picked up his bicycle and threw it at me. Then he stormed up on me and put me in handcuffs and told me that I was under arrest and that I also was going to jail. At that, he began to yank me, and my house shoes came off, and he proceeded to drag me across the parking lot. Well, I landed on my knees, and the security guard was on top of me with his knee in the back of my neck, trying to force me to lay on the ground. I saw 2 of my other daughters come out. I heard them arguing, and then I saw Deandre Butler trying to remove his gun from his holster. He was struggling with it, but it wouldn't come out. Then I saw one of my neighbors, a young man by the name of Sean, asking the security guard, "Why are you doing this to these women?" And so as I'm there on the ground, the police came, the real police came. And I was so glad to see them because I thought I was going to be able to explain the situation as to what has occurred. But this big puzzle gut police officer, David Gort, pulled me up off the ground. And I asked him if I could please go inside and change my clothes because I had only come out in my house coat and my gown. But he told me no. He put me in his police car. And I heard Deandre Butler say to the other police officers, "Arrest them too," meaning my other 2 daughters who had come out, who were pepper sprayed in their eyes. And so I'm in the police car. I haven't said a word. I don't know what's going to happen or the procedure. But when I went into the police office, I was handcuffed to the table. And I didn't realize that I had been injured. The police officer, David Gort, came and handed me a Band-Aid and an alcohol wipe. And when I looked down at my knees, both of them were bleeding, but my right knee was worse than my left knee. And so because the sore was so big and it was an open sore, I did not take the Band-Aid and the alcohol wipe because he really should have called in some type of medical help for me, but he didn't do that. And we were never asked any questions whatsoever. We were never allowed to give our account of what happened. But I was taken in the back, and my mug shot was taken, and the police told us to sign a paper, which was some type of recognizance form, and we signed that, but we were never read any rights or anything, and then we were told that we could go. And I objected, saying I want to press charges against Deandre Butler. And Lieutenant Brooks took me into a little room and told me that I was not allowed to do that. He told me that I had to go and speak to Chris Debruler, the owner of the Hebron Townhouse Apartments. Now, I didn't understand that. I was at the police station. That is where a person should go when they've been assaulted. And I didn't understand why they would not allow me to press charges against Deandre Butler. And then I discovered that they were protecting Deandre Butler. As a matter of fact, they had given him a name. They referred to him as Corporal Butler. And so my daughters and I left the police station, and I went to the emergency room and got my cuts and my scrapes and all that had happened to me. I got those cleaned, and I got my report from the emergency room, and I sent that report to the owner of the Hebron Townhouse Apartments, Chris Debruler. And I did try to contact him, but he would not respond. I have never to this day spoken to him. Never. And the next morning, I had things to do because early on when the officer came, there was a young lady that was trying to get me to sign a petition to get this guard out of the housing complex, but I didn't know at the time all what was going on because I had been told that he was there to clean out drug-related issues, and which I didn't know was occurring there because the townhouse was basically quiet. To me, it was a really good neighborhood to live in, so I wasn't aware of all the other things that were going on. So now I'm going to get out. I'm going to get these petitions signed because I know that at this point that Deandre Butler is a very evil person. And as I was going from door to door and people were signing the petition, which I didn't have any problem with, a lot of people signed. A lot of people were eager to sign. And as I was going from door to door, some of the young ladies were telling me their stories, their horrifying stories of Deandre Butler shining his flashlight on their behinds as they were coming to their homes after work. And it was really breaking my heart because I wasn't aware that he was doing all these things. But my foot began to hurt me real bad, and when I looked down, my foot was swollen up. And so I had to go back to the emergency room, and this time the nurse, her name was Betty, Mary was her name. She tried contacting the Zion Police Department, and she couldn't reach anybody, and she came and told me, you need to get you a lawyer because now they're doing me the same way that they have been doing you. And so x-rays were taken, and I had a fractured bone in my right toe. And I want to mention that the next morning after the incident, I also went to the state's attorney's office because that's where everyone was telling me that I should go. And I spoke with Jeff Pavlitek, and I explained to him all that had occurred, what Deandre Butler had done, the fact that he had written up tickets on all of us. Deandre Butler did that, And the only thing that Jeff Pavlitek asked me was, did he write them up on real police tickets? And I said, well, yeah. I had never seen a police ticket, but it looked like a real police ticket to me. And so I told him yes. And I thought that, and I showed him how I had been injured. And the next day he called me up and he says, I called to the police department and they said that you brought that on yourself. And I have to say, I was totally shocked that the state's attorney was saying this to me and that they had just taken the word of the police officers and let it go. He just let it go. And after that, I guess the police, the mayor, they decided, hey, we can do whatever we want to do, because Deandre Butler came to my home between 10 and 11 o'clock. One night, he and another guy I don't know, but the person I did know handed me eviction papers as Deandre Butler stood back and watched. And so now Deandre Butler had written up this eviction on me, which was full of lies, saying things like, when he sent for me that day to come down and speak with him, that I refused to come, and that I told him that I would speak with him at 9 o'clock the following morning, which was a lie because I did work. And he said that my daughter was wandering around in the housing complex, highly intoxicated. And it was all lies. And so, knowing now that I've got to seek some type of outside help, I called one of the ministers in North Chicago, Illinois, Mr. Eugene Robeson, and I explained to him what Deandre Butler had done to me. I explained to him everything that had happened, and he did say that he had called the mayor, Mayor Lane Harrison, and now I was being evicted for really no reason. It was a false eviction. I tried contacting the NAACP. I did speak with Mr. Charles Bridgman, I believe that was his name, and he said to me, well, that's how those police officers and security guards are. And that was it. And so Deandre Butler had dragged me across the parking lot. He had fractured a bone in my right toe. With other x-rays, I had a pinched nerve in my left arm, and I had a herniated disc in my neck and lower back. That was the prognosis. And now I was being falsely evicted. And so I called Reverend Eugene Robeson again, and he said that he was having a meeting at his church, the Ministers Alliance, and he asked me to come. And my children and I went. I explained everything to the ministers, what had happened. And one of the ministers stood up and said, maybe we can get together and get a lawyer for this lady. And his name was Reverend C.L. Fairchild. And I left feeling like, well, maybe someone is going to do something now. Well, someone did do something, because later on that night I did receive a call from the NAACP, Mrs. Jackie Dobbs, telling me that she was going to go out on a limb and help me. And so I was very happy about that, and she did help me. She took me back down to State Perry's legal services, because I had been there as well. But there was a mix-up in communication. That's what they said. But to show you the power of the NAACP, when I went with Mrs. Dobbs, they immediately took my case, and they sent me letters saying that it was going to be an uphill climb, that most of the time the judge does not change his mind after he has made a ruling, but witnesses came forth. It was time consuming, and eventually my children and I, we had to split up. We had to move. They went to live with different people. I went to stay with a friend, and it was very hard on my children because they were still in school, and it was just very hard. And I was very sick, mind you, because I had also at that time discovered I had a thyroid condition, and I was losing a lot of weight, and I was just sick and dealing with that. Deandre Butler, now I have to move. It was very hard on me, but we did that. We moved. And witnesses came forth and testified what they had seen Deandre Butler do. And the judge did change his mind in the ruling when the truth came forth. And the NAACP told me, now you can move back into your home. And I kept asking, well, what about Deandre Butler? You don't know what he does. You don't know how he harasses me. He stands at my back door like some type of guard. He stands out in the front. When you go to look out your window, you pull the curtains back. There you see Deandre Butler standing with his police uniform and his gun. Excuse me. You don't know how he has harassed me when I park my car. If it's over the line, just teeny bit, he comes and tells me that I have to move my car and straighten it up. And he intimidates me. And I'm really afraid of him. And I don't know if I'm going to have to go and buy me a gun. I don't know at this point how I'm going to handle Deandre Butler. So how can I move back over there with regard to the things that he's doing to other people? He has banned people off the property. And as I'm calling around looking for a lawyer, and speaking of a lawyer, I did hire a lawyer early on. A neighbor gave me his name, Mr. Keith Lewis West, and I contacted him. And he sent me a letter saying that he was going to represent me. And every time I would call and try to speak with him, he kept telling me, build up your case, build up your case. And I'm asking, what do you mean build up my case? I've already been injured. The case has built itself. And so I never understood why he kept telling me to build up my case. And when the day came for the trial that I was supposed to have, but I never did have, because this lawyer had some woman to call me up. I don't know if she was his secretary or not, but she told me that there wasn't going to be any trial because Mr. West was going through a divorce. And it was at that time that I dismissed him. I didn't want him to represent me because heretofore he hadn't done anything anyway. And so now I'm left with trying to find someone to represent me. I don't have the NAACP, but thank God for Mrs. Dobbs for what she did do, for helping me to win my case, to win the case of the false eviction. Everything written up by Deandre Butler and blessed by Mr. Chris Debruler. Mr. Chris Debruler, the money man. The money man, when we went to speak with Mayor Lane Harrison, all he could talk about was the money, the money, the money, the money, the money that Chris Debruler gave to the city. And so now I'm knowing that Chris Debruler is financing everyone. In my mind, he has paid for the protection of Deandre Butler. And that is why I was told, you are not allowed to press charges. When I went to the police department for my incident report, they told me, you are not allowed to have your incident report. So I had to go to the mayor. He wasn't in his office. I went to his home. I'm out there banging on the door, and he comes, and I'm on crutches, and I'm telling him the police officers refused to give me my incident report for me and my daughters because we were all arrested. Deandre Butler arrested us all. I was charged with battery. 2 of my other daughters were charged with battery, and the one was charged with trespassing. And so the mayor goes and calls someone. I'm assuming that it's the police department that he's calling. And then he comes back and he tells me it is against the law for you to have your incident reports. Now I have to go to the commissioner of Zion, Mr. Amos Monk, who was the only person that I went to that listened to me and tried to help me. If it had not been for Mr. Amos Monk, I would never have gotten anything in writing from the police, because remember, at the police department, we were not asked what happened. We were not allowed to speak, to tell our side. I was not allowed to press charges against a person who assaulted me. I was not allowed. And so at the office of Commissioner Amos Monk, he sent for Lieutenant Brooks, the police officer who told me I was not allowed to press charges. And so now he comes dragging in, and that is really the way that he came in, dragging in, and he had the nerve to be complaining about the security guard, Deandre Butler. And so I showed him all of the cuts and all of the bruises. And that is the only way that I was able to obtain anything in writing from Lieutenant Brooks, which his report was full of lies as well, defending the police department, saying that only police officers have the right to arrest people, but not in the Hebron Townhouse Apartments. Deandre Butler arrested, handcuffed, made his report, his false reports, and then filed them at the police station. And then his reports were used for as truth and facts. And everything he wrote was a lie. And as I was calling around trying to find me representation, some of the lawyers were telling me that other people had come in and voiced complaints about Deandre Butler. As a matter of fact, at the very beginning of my incident, I went and tried to hire a lawyer in Waukegan by the name of John Jonas, and he told me, I don't believe this. I just finished dealing with this young man. He broke the arm of a young girl living in the Whispering Oaks Apartments. And he said he would really be surprised to see me again. But I wasn't able to pay this lawyer what he required. I just didn't have enough money. And I didn't understand really why it was my responsibility to even find a lawyer, because I had gone to the state's attorney's office, and I had gone back to the state's attorney's office, and I tried contacting Jeff Pavlitak many, many times. And one time I spoke with him, and he said to me, had I known you were injured as badly as you were, I would have gotten you a lawyer. And I just didn't understand why he didn't do that. He should have done that when I came to him, when he saw my cuts. And I still have those scars. I still have the scar on my knee, my elbow. I have a big scar here on my elbow. And so now he's saying, had I known you were hurt as badly as you were, I would have gotten you a lawyer. But why didn't you investigate? Wasn't that your job? I don't know the responsibilities of the state's attorney's office, but I know many people told me to go there. And might I add, I had also tried to contact Rainbow Coalition. I don't know if that's the proper name for it, headed up by Jesse Jackson. I'd also tried to contact them, and I had sent them pictures at the time of my injuries, but I never heard anything. And so all these organizations, the NAACP, Rainbow Coalition, State's Attorney's Office, what are their responsibilities? I put an article in the paper about the NAACP, wanting to know what is the structure and function of them. What aren't they in place to help people? When I called and spoke to the new president of the NAACP, Miss Merlin McElroy, and she said to me, "You weren't hurt that bad." And that really stunned and hurt me even more, because I said, you know, you're a woman, I'm a woman. You haven't even met with me. You haven't seen what he did to me. You haven't read any of my medical reports or anything, but yet you have made the judgment. You have determined in your mind that I wasn't hurt that bad, which only sounded to me like a scapegoat. It only sounded to me, you don't want to be involved and you don't want to do your job. Therefore, I did not get any help from Miss McElroy. I was left to fight for myself, to defend myself, because if you ever step out, if you ever put yourself out front to fight, and that is what I tried to do, excuse me, in the Hebrons, going from door to door, even going down to the courthouse to find out information about Deandre Butler. And he had a long record of DUIs and terrible behavior. And I got copies of those records, and I put them in everybody's mailbox. And I tried to tell them, look, we can't, this is a time for us to pull together. You cannot be sitting in your house watching TV all day, ignoring the actions of Deandre Butler, because he could have your child out there in handcuffs, frisking your daughters. Anyway, he can put his hands on them, because Deandre Butler, in all honesty, had a penis problem. And he sought to use the Hebron Townhouse Apartments, low-income housing. And this wasn't the first low-income housing that he worked in, as I did my own personal investigation. And I began to meet women who also had complaints about Deandre Butler coming into their homes at will whenever he got ready. That is how I discovered the lawyer, Mr. Julius Cole, because a lady told me that she had filed a report that she had hired this man with regard to a case pertaining to Deandre Butler. And so I took my rent money and I hired him, because I had to get the false arrest cleared, because my intention was to file a personal injury lawsuit. And so Mr. Cole accepted my case, and not one police officer appeared. Now, isn't that weird? Not one police officer showed up to defend himself. So the charges were dropped. Now I'm in a position to file my personal injury lawsuit. And I'm calling all around in Chicago, Illinois, to find me a lawyer, because I have been told by one of the ministers that it wouldn't be good to get a lawyer in that area, because they all work together. And so as I'm calling in Chicago, I call and a man gives me a number of a lawyer in Waukegan. At this time, I'm feeling hopeless, and that I gotta do what I gotta do. So he gave me the name of attorney Robert Long, and I went to his office. I had already written up my first personal lawsuit case. myself, and I had already filed it myself. And I took a copy to Mr. Long, and he said, "Who wrote this?" And I said, "Well, I did with the help of my son, who was at that time going to school, going to law school. He was taking some type of course." And he said, "You did a really good job." And he says, "Well, I'm going to represent you. I'm going to take your case on contingency." And he said, "But I don't know about the city of Zion, because in my lawsuit, I filed a case against Debruler, Deandre Butler, Patrick and Associates Security Company, because that's who Butler worked through, and the city of Zion." And so Mr. Long said that he did not want to deal with the city of Zion, and I asked him, "Well, how are you going to do it? Because they are the culprits. I mean, everything that happened to me was a result of the police protecting Deandre Butler, and so I don't see how they're going to be eliminated." And so he gave the case to Mr. Attorney Kevin Apter, and I began to get letters, good letters, encouraging letters about the lawsuit, and I was happy about it. And I felt, well, at least I'm going to get something for all my troubles. And then Kevin Apter went to the police department and took the deposition from David C. Gort. And he called me up and he said, "That police officer is a liar. He's lying." And the next thing I knew, I was getting a letter from the lawyers saying that they were dropping my case because there was no new discovery. And I says, well, he discovered that David C. Gort was a liar in his deposition. I mean, he had things like, I was the only police officer that arrived on the scene that night. The lawyers are asking, there are no other reports from any other police officers? No. I was the only one there. And other things like when Miss Putman was in my car, she was cussing and she was loud, and if you know Miss Putman, you know that she very rarely ever uses any curse words. I mean, never. But everything was a lie. Everything. And so now I don't have anyone to represent me. I don't know who to go to. I've been to everyone, but even so, I'm still trying to go to the NAACP in Bloomington, Illinois, Mr. Donald Jackson. They told me to fill out the papers, and I sent my case to him. And he told me that it would be examined, and I never heard anything, and I called and I called and called, and nothing ever happened with that. And so one of the very prominent men in North Chicago, God bless him, Mr. Waddell Brooks, called up to the police department on my behalf, trying to find out what was going on, because I worked with his daughter at Carmen School. And the police told him, when he called me back, this is what he said. The police said, "Your sons were selling drugs out of your house." And I was shocked. And I'm thinking, the police can say whatever they want to say. Now my sons are selling drugs out of my house. My daughter is wandering around in the housing complex, highly intoxicated, and I'm in the back of the police car cussing and acting a fool, according to David C. Gort. And to me, this is how police officers can paint their own picture of blacks. Because when you read stuff like that, you really figure it could be possible. After all, that's the way black people act. They're loud, they're cussing. Yeah. They selling those drugs out your mama's house. Well, why weren't they arrested? What proof, what evidence do you have? And even saying, Deandre Butler saying that I tried, me, Miss Putman, I tried to take his gun out of his holster. All of these things are documented. This is what they write. Whatever they write is believed. Because the NAACP, they don't have time to ask questions or to do any type of investigation. The police said it, I believe it, and that settles it. And that is how I was dealt with. Whatever the police said, the state's attorney is going to believe it. And I sent papers to the governor. I sent all my papers. I sent all my evidence, all my medical records and everything, even to the president, saying, please help me. Please take the time to do an evaluation. Make Deandre Butler, David C. Gordon, Lieutenant Brooks, Mayor Lane Harrison, whom I renamed Lame, L-A-M-E, Harrison, because he was nothing more than a puppet in my eyes. And the police were nothing more than men selling their souls to the devil. The devil being Chris Debruler, the man with the money. Yeah, Deandre Butler would ride through the housing complex on his new motorcycle, showing off his toys that his daddy, Satan, had rewarded him with. That's how I saw it, because I am a Christian. And I looked at this thing from a spiritual viewpoint. I thank God for Miss Gina Bone, because she refused to be a part of the conspiracy. But then Miss Deborah Langley, well, if you have a plot, then you have got to put the people in place that's going to go along with the plot. And so all these people had agreed, this is what we're going to do. So people were afraid to come out their houses. It was like living in jail. And I wish that everyone who had an encounter with Deandre Butler would speak out. Anyone who's had problems with the Zion Police Department would speak out, because I've prayed about this situation for a long time, and I've asked my Heavenly Father to give me the justice that I deserve, because I should have won my case in 2003. 2003, but I didn't, because I also found out that the lawyers, they don't want to have anything to do with police officers, because if they did, if they weren't afraid, I would have won my settlement in 2003. And so, having to split up my family, I went to live with one of my friends, and one night she says, "Why are the police out in your van?" And I rushed to the window and pulled the curtain back, and sure enough, I saw a police officer out in my van. But I didn't go out there, because now I know that I don't have anyone to report their actions to except Jesus. except Jesus. And I said, Lord, I don't know why that officer is in my car, but please don't let him be out there setting a bomb or doing anything that's going to hurt me, Lord. Cover me, cover my van. And everything was okay when I started my car up. And so I don't know why they were out there in my car. But I had to move in the worst part. When I finally did get a house again, I had to move in the worst part, the worst housing project in the area. And I cried about that as well, but I made it. I made it because, as I said, I'm a Christian, and the Lord spoke to me and said, I have people in this area that I want to be reached. And as I looked around at all the beer bottles and wine bottles and whiskey bottles on the ground, the Lord spoke to me and said, my people are oppressed. And there are people over here that I need you to reach. And so I went on in and I stayed there for a couple years and I left. But my whole thing now is I never got a chance to press charges against Deandre Butler. And I fought for those rights for years and years. And even now I feel that I should have the right to press charges against a man who made a fist at me, who threw his bicycle at me, who stormed up on me because he was so angry. Because I told him, I'm not going to let you out of my sight with my daughter. Why would I? Why would a mother release her child to a fool, a man whose only intention was to have sex with any woman, any young girl that he could in the housing area? That's all he did. He made jokes about the Hebron Townhouse Apartments being Butlersville because he had been given the power and authority to do whatever he wanted to do in the Hebron Townhouse Apartments. And so I'm asking the world, what do you think? Should I, even at this late stage, go back, file those charges against Deandre Butler, and let the proper procedure, what the police should have done, take place? And the lawyer that accepted my case on contingency, that said, we will represent you, and then all of a sudden they bail out when they discover that what I had been saying about the police was true. And so they bailed out and left me dry and high. And when I tried to get other lawyers, they would call Robert Long's office, and whatever he said to them would discourage him, and they would not accept my case. Therefore, I'm just putting it out there to the world. Please help me get the chance to press charges against someone who assaulted and battered me, thereby helping me to receive the settlement that I should have received in the year 2003. Thank you, and God bless you. I want to add that concerning the police, when my son and I went to the police department to speak with the chief of police, we were again told by the Zion police, you are not allowed. It seems that every time I went to the police, their hands were up to stop me, and I was not allowed to do many things. I was not allowed to press charges against Deandre Butler. I was not allowed to have my incident report, nor those of my daughters. Now I'm not allowed to speak to the chief of police. I asked the young man who gave me this information what was his name, and he refused to tell me. He did say something to the effect like badge 67. He gave me his badge number. And we were told, my son and I, that we had to start at the bottom and go through their chain of command in order to reach the chief of police. And I believe I heard someone say his name was Malcolm. I'm not sure. I never was given the opportunity to speak with him. And then it seems that I heard, this is just hearsay, that he had quit later on. And so that bit of information wasn't nothing new to me, because I felt that if indeed that did happen, that maybe he didn't want to be a part of the mess, that it had just gotten out of hand. The police department had just gotten so ridiculous that he didn't want to bring any shame to his name. He didn't want any part of it. And those were just my thoughts. Also, I want to say that when I went to the Ministers Alliance, there were a lot of ministers there, and I was expecting that at least 2 or 3 of them would go up to the police department to ask questions, to find out what was going on. After all, I thought I was standing before the men of God, men filled with the Holy Spirit, who could discern that I was telling the truth, and a few of those pastors knew me. Now, I want to give credit and honor to 3 of those pastors, one being Reverend C.L. Fairchild, who called me up later on and asked me to come to his church, telling me that the Reverend Jesse Jackson was going to be there and he was going to arrange for me to speak with him. And I did go to his church. Reverend Fairchild and some of the people that were with Jesse Jackson did come and get me and escort me to this little room. As I sat out in the hallway, there were many people there, many people around Reverend Jesse Jackson, and every time someone came out, I could see them posing. I could see the camera lights flashing, and I sat there and I waited and waited and waited and waited until the crowd diminished, and then a lady came out and introduced herself as Denise Dixon, and I asked where the Reverend Jesse Jackson was, and she said, talking to me is like talking to Jesse Jackson himself. And I talked to her, and I never heard anything more. And so that made me feel like unless you are a movie star, celebrity, of someone of importance, there is a great possibility that you will not be seen or heard from Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, none of those men who I thought were in positions to help their people, to help the blacks, to help anyone needing justice and fair treatment. And so that was extremely discouraging to me, because as I said earlier, I had tried to reach the Rainbow Coalition and I never heard anything. The police, the Zion Police Department, as far as I'm concerned, a group of, to me they were like a legalized gang, whereas I didn't have any rights. I was not allowed. This is what they kept stopping me. I couldn't make any progress. Stop. You are not allowed. Those words I kept hearing over and over and over. Yet Deandre Butler was allowed to throw his bicycle at me. He was allowed to handcuff and arrest me. He was allowed to drag me like a piece of garbage across the parking lot in my house coat and gown. Can you imagine how humiliating that was in front of my sons? And when one of my sons attempted to come to my rescue just to ask me, Mama, are you okay? Are you all right? The big puzzle gut police officer, Dave Seagord, picked him up and threw him out the way. And as a mother, that hurt me. That hurt me. And yes, all this happened to me while living in the Hebron Townhouse apartments. And even though I asked the Lord to help me to forgive all of the people involved, people that I went to that refused to listen to me, that chose to take the word of the police officers and the security guard, Deandre Butler, while he bragged, because he didn't try to hide anything. Deandre Butler did not try to hide any of the evil things that he was doing. And he would boast, and he did boast to my son, that the police had his back. Those were his words. The police had my back. How shameful, how embarrassing that should be for police officers sworn to protect and serve the people. And what is it these days? What has happened that police officers are allowed to do all these evil things, to say whatever they want to say about a person, and they are so easily believed? And when do they have to give an account? When is David Seagord, which in his deposition began telling how he was in Desert Storm and all that, and trying to make himself out to be a hero, when in fact I was in the desert, I was in a dry and thirsty land in my efforts to receive help, to receive justice, and I was in a storm because Deandre Butler is the one that stirred that storm. Because even in the midst of all that mess that he was doing, he called the police. He summoned the police. This is what is on the report, that the police officers were answering a call put in by Deandre Butler for assistance with a family fight. And so when those police officers arrived, I believe that some of them, namely Joel Lowry, Fier, I don't know his last name, but his first name, but I know Fier. And where was the police officer that was driving the paddy wagon that my daughters were in? All these people came to the scene. Where are their reports? And these are the type of questions that lawyer Kevin Apter was asking David Seagord. And David Seagord, his answers were so ridiculous. And you could tell, if you could read the deposition, you will see that the lawyer was getting frustrated with asking him these questions, because many of the questions he did not even understand. And the lawyer had to constantly break it down to its lowest form of simple words so that he could answer, because he could not answer properly, not as a police officer, a trained, intelligent police officer would. David Seagord didn't do that. And the lawyer even asked him, do you plan on retiring anytime soon? And that, interpreted by me, read, you are so guilty. Do you plan on retiring? But of course he said no. And well, there are a couple other ministers that I would like to give honor to, another being Reverend Arthur Gass. I did go to his church, and he did do what he could to try to help. At least he tried. And so out of all of those ministers, because one minister that I tried to call asked me, how did you get my phone number? And there again, wow, how did you get my phone number? This is what the man of God said to me. But nevertheless, Reverend Eugene Robeson, God bless you. Hats off to you. Thank you. Reverend Arthur Gass, thank you. God bless you. Hats off to you. Reverend C.L. Fairchild, may you rest in peace. Thank you for what you tried to do. Thank you very much. And every day, even though I ask God to help me to forgive these people, I still ask, long yearn for justice. I still want all of the times that I was told you are not allowed to press charges against Deandre Butler. I still want to. I still feel that I have a right to go to the police station and press charges against that man. And I still pray for that to happen, that due process of justice will be carried out on my behalf. Yes, I sent papers to the governor, and I'm quite sure that there are many people, if they would come forth, that would say, this woman has written time and time and time again. I never gave up. I never gave up because I believed in God's word that said all things are possible to him who believed. And I always believed for justice, and I never gave up. Now, people were saying, your statute of limitation is done. Well, it shouldn't have been done. If people had acted and done the right thing when I went to them, that never would have happened. That happened because I was left to fend for myself. Because of the cowards. Many of the pastors, seemingly, in my eyes, were cowards. Pastors that I had seen as fireballs behind the pulpit. Now it's time for you to come from behind the pulpit and go out into the community and go up to that police station and ask questions. None went. Not one. And then I wonder if it had been David C. Gort's daughter that Deandre did this evil thing to, or Mayor Lane Harrison's daughter, or Jeff Pavlitek's daughter, or mother, or sister, that Deandre Butler had done this terrible injustice to. Oh, it would have been on. He wouldn't have gotten away with it. But you know, I can say that years later, when they knew that they had gotten away with what they did, Debruler tried to install Deandre Butler back over in the Hebron Townhouse Apartments. But you know what? The people got together, they went to the office, and they said, we don't think so. No, we don't want him over here. Now you see what happens when people pull together? And that's all I was trying to get them to do at the time, was pull together. Stand up, police yourselves. We don't have to deal with this. But the people were scared. They did not want to be evicted from their homes because many people were wrongfully evicted from their homes just as I was. And so I say to the world, I plead with anyone who has seen this video who may be in a position to help me, to restore unto me the justice that I deserved. Because what was done to me and my family was wrong. And the mayor knew that it was wrong. And the pastor who had a large church in Zion that I went to, that knew me, knew my children, considered himself and called himself a shaker and a mover. But he didn't shake, and he did not move his mouth or anything when it came to helping me. But he did say, sue them. Wow. That's what he told me. And so I'm yet asking. I commit this whole video to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I'm committing it unto him. And I'm asking him, because he says in his word not to fawn on the judge, but ask the Lord for justice. And I'm yet asking for justice. Joyce Lenora Henry Putman is asking for justice and to be compensated for all the ills and pains and cuts and broken bones that Deandre Butler inflicted upon me and my family. And I pray that they will all come to a point in their lives where they will repent of their sin, beginning with the mayor on down. And I forgive them, but I still want them to be held accountable for what they did to me. And so I have said all I had to say, all that was on my heart, and I pray that it will be received and that justice will be carried out, that I will no longer be told, stop. You are not allowed. And this is what the police should have been saying to Corporal Deandre Butler. They should have been saying, stop. You are not allowed to assault and batter anyone and get away with it. But they were cowards. Thank you.